December 5th, 1942. The wind howled across the steppe like a beast that never tired. The cold was not weather. It was a living thing, clawing through the seams of uniforms, biting into skin, turning breath into crystal. In that endless white silence, on the southwestern edge of Stalingrad, a lone T-34 tank sat half-buried in snow. Its once green armor was charred black, its treads shattered, its engine dead. Inside that coffin of steel were 4 men. Lieutenant Alexei Voronov, commander; Sergeant Mikhail Petrov, gunner; Corporal Ivan Sasha Leonov, driver; Private Yuri Orlov, loader. They had been fighting without pause for 6 days, pushing west, retreating east, surrounded by a storm of artillery and death. Their orders had been simple: hold the village of Kotlubin until reinforcements arrived. Reinforcements never came. The last German shell that found them had torn through the rear armor, igniting the fuel lines and blowing the transmission apart. Leonov managed to smother the flames with snow, but the damage was done. The T-34, their lifeline, their shelter, their weapon, was crippled. Outside, the snow kept falling. The horizon burned red, where the city of Stalingrad still screamed in fire and smoke. Inside, silence. Only the slow hiss of freezing breath. Voronov stared through the periscope slit at the desolate field. There were no friendlies, no movement, only the shapes of dead machines half swallowed by the drift. Somewhere out there, German infantry were advancing, sweeping the plain for survivors. He lowered the scope. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, as if giving a routine order. Engines finished? Leonov's hands trembled around a wrench. Cranks cracked. The oil froze in the line. We're done moving, Comrade Lieutenant. Petrov cursed under his breath. Then we're sitting ducks. Yuri Orlov laughed, a dry, hopeless sound. Better ducks than ghosts. No one smiled. For a long moment, Voronov said nothing. His face was gaunt from hunger, but his eyes were sharp, alive with the same relentless will that had carried them through Kharkov, through Don, through the slaughter at Kalash. Then he said something the others didn't expect. "If the tank cannot move," he said quietly, "then we make the world move around it." They looked at him, confused, exhausted, and then slowly they understood. They weren't going to abandon the T-34. They were going to turn it into a fortress. Outside, the wind screamed across the wreckage of the steppe. Snow swept through the gaps in the armor. They began to move. Petrov checked what ammunition remained: 12 armor-piercing shells, 6 high-explosive, and 200 rounds for the coaxial machine gun. Orlov scavenged ration tins from a fallen infantry squad nearby. Leonov pulled a broken shovel from the rear deck and began digging a shallow trench around the hull, piling snow and ice into crude walls. Every breath burned in their lungs. Every sound carried across the frozen wasteland. By nightfall, they had built a half-circle of defense: barrels, bricks, ammunition boxes filled with snow. The T-34 stood like a wounded animal, defiant against the storm. At dawn, the first German patrol appeared. 3 men, silhouettes in the snow, rifles slung across their backs. They approached cautiously, mistaking the tank for a wreck. Inside, Petrov waited. The reticle lined up, a slow exhale, then one short burst. The machine gun roared. The sound shattered the stillness. The patrol fell where they stood. Voronov lowered his binoculars. "Now they know we're alive." He was right. That single burst set off a chain of events that would echo through the frozen fields of Stalingrad. The Germans would come for them, again and again, certain they could root out 4 men trapped in a dead tank. They were wrong. In that moment, with the snow falling and smoke curling from the gun barrel, something ancient stirred in those men, a kind of defiance born from despair. They were outnumbered, cut off, and surrounded. But in their minds, the T-34 was not broken. It was reborn, a fortress on tracks, and they would hold it. Long before it became a fortress buried in the snow, the T-34 had already earned its place as a legend. When it first rolled off the lines in 1940, the world had never seen anything like it. Its armor was sloped, angled steel that deflected enemy fire instead of absorbing it. Its tracks were wide enough to cross the mud of the Russian spring. Its diesel engine could run for days on poor fuel and colder air. It was, as one German officer would later write, the best tank in the world. But in the winter of 1942, legends were made of necessity, not admiration. The Soviet Union had been bleeding since Operation Barbarossa. Factory after factory had been uprooted, dismantled, and dragged east by rail, beyond the reach of the Luftwaffe. Women, old men, and children worked 16-hour shifts, building engines, casting turrets, welding armor plates together, with hands blistered from the cold. From those furnaces came the T-34, tens of thousands of them. Machines born in haste, hardened in fire. Every tank was different, each one carrying the fingerprints of the people who built it. The workers called them our sons of steel. Soldiers called them brothers. To the Germans, they were ghosts, fast, agile, and seemingly endless. Yet for all its perfection, the T-34 was still mortal. Lieutenant Voronov's tank had survived weeks of combat along the Volga front. It had crossed rivers under shell fire, driven through burning villages, and dragged wounded comrades to safety. The crew treated it less like a machine and more like a living thing, a comrade that bled oil instead of blood. They had painted its turret by hand, Za Rodinu, for the motherland. But now, on that frozen plain near Stalingrad, their comrade had fallen silent. The German Sixth Army was closing in from the west, confident that the Red Army was finished. Hitler had promised them victory before Christmas. The streets of Stalingrad were already seas of rubble. Factories turned into fortresses, apartments into graveyards. In those ruins, tanks like Voronov's were more than weapons. They were lifelines. The Soviet command called them mobile strongpoints. Crews called them homes. Inside the hull, they ate, slept, prayed, and fought. When a T-34 died, it was like losing a soldier. When it survived, it became a legend. The engineers who designed it, Mikhail Koshkin and Alexander Morozov, had built more than a tank. They built a philosophy of survival, simplicity over elegance, strength over luxury. Every bolt, every weld was meant to be fixed in the field, even with nothing but wire and frozen fingers. That was why Voronov refused to abandon it. He knew what the machine could endure. He had seen shells bounce off its flanks, fire lick its armor and fade. A broken tread, a cracked crankshaft. These were not death sentences. They were challenges. As the wind screamed over the steppe, Voronov's gaze lingered on the jagged tear where shrapnel had split the engine housing. The damage was hopeless, but he didn't see ruin. He saw a foundation. If the tank couldn't move, it could still shoot. If it couldn't chase the enemy, it could outlast them. He turned to his men. "They built this tank to survive anything," he said. "Let's prove them right." That was when the idea became something more than desperation. It became purpose. Around them, the wrecks of other Soviet tanks lay silent, iron tombs half buried in snow. Most crews had been killed or captured. Few remained to tell their stories. But Voronov's crew would not vanish quietly. They began to scavenge. From the corpses of friend and foe alike, they would build something new. What had been forged for movement would become an immovable bastion, a weapon reborn through human will. And in the dark days of Stalingrad, that will was stronger than steel. Night descended on the frozen steppe like a curtain of black ice. The horizon vanished. The snow swallowed the world. Somewhere beyond that darkness, the thunder of artillery echoed, distant, steady, relentless, The front was alive, but here, in this small patch of desolation, 4 men worked in silence, transforming despair into defiance. Lieutenant Voronov stood outside the tank, snow crusting on his greatcoat. His breath rose like smoke as he scanned the field through binoculars. To the north, the glint of German flares. To the west, the faint orange glow of fires burning in the ruins of Kotluban. They were deep in no man's land, too far from Soviet lines to retreat, too close to German patrols to risk movement. "Dig here," he said, motioning toward the front of the hull. "We make the snow our wall." Corporal Leonov, the driver, nodded and began to shovel. Each strike of the spade echoed in the stillness, the rhythm of survival. Petrov and Orlov dragged ammunition boxes from the tank, stacking them in a half-circle, filling them with snow and dirt. Makeshift barriers. Hours passed. The cold bit through their gloves. Metal stuck to skin. When their hands went numb, they breathed on them, cursed, and kept working. By midnight, the T-34 no longer looked like a crippled tank. It looked like something else, a creature half-buried, armored against death itself. The snowbank wrapped its lower hull like a shield. Its turret rose above the drifts, a steel crown gleaming under moonlight. Inside, they worked on the guns. Petrov stripped the 7.62mm DT machine gun, cleaning it with a rag soaked in alcohol scavenged from the first aid kit. Orlov, the youngest, found a German MG-34 lying beside a frozen body. Its barrel was cracked, but its bipod and feed tray were intact. He dragged it back, teeth chattering, eyes wild with excitement. "Look, comrade lieutenant," he said. "It still sings." Voronov inspected it. "Good. Then we'll make it sing louder." They mounted the German weapon in the commander's hatch, securing it with wire and broken bolts. 2 guns now, one facing forward, one watching the flanks. The fortress was beginning to breathe. By dawn, their shelter took shape. Around the hull, they laid barbed wire scavenged from a destroyed supply post. They propped up wooden planks and scrap metal to create firing positions. The snow walls thickened until bullets would sink in and vanish. Petrov found a rusted stovepipe in the debris and fixed it through a gap in the armor, running it to a small trench behind the tank. They could burn scraps, wood, paper, anything, to melt snow for water without giving away their position. The smoke drifted low, blending into the mist. Leonov rewired the interior lights, using pieces of a broken field radio. The tank glowed faintly from within, a warm amber pulse in the frozen dark. When it was finished, they stood in silence, staring at what they had made. It wasn't just a tank anymore. It was a citadel, their last line, their home, their defiance carved into the ice. Voronov stepped back, brushing snow from his shoulders. "No one gets through here," he said. "No one." The others nodded. In that moment, exhaustion became pride. Fear became purpose. As the first rays of sun crept over the steppe, a small German patrol appeared from the west. 3 men, rifles slung, unaware of the trap they were walking into. They paused, scanning the field, mistaking the buried tank for another corpse of war. Inside, Petrov adjusted the gun sight. His finger hovered over the trigger. The air was still, the silence unbearable. Then, one burst, short, precise. The snow erupted. The men fell. Smoke curled from the gun barrel. The fortress had spoken. Voronov lowered his binoculars, his face unreadable. "Now," he said, "they will come for us." And they did. For the next 11 days, this patch of frozen wasteland would become a battleground, a duel between a dead tank and a living army. But that morning, as the wind rose and the fortress settled deeper into the snow, 4 men had already won the first battle. They had refused to die. By the second day, the snow had stopped falling, but the killing had begun. From dawn to dusk, the steppe was alive with echoes of gunfire. The Germans had discovered the fortress. and disbelief had turned to fury. To them, it was a ghost, a dead tank that refused to stay dead. Patrols sent to investigate never returned. Machine gun nests set up nearby went silent within hours. Something inside that wreck was fighting back, and it terrified them. For 11 days, the siege would grind on. At first, the attacks were cautious. Small probing teams advanced through the snow, whispering orders in guttural German. Through the periscope slit, Petrov could see their breath rising like fog. He waited until they were within 50 meters, then fired. The 76mm cannon thundered, the recoil shaking the hull. The shell tore through the white haze and exploded in a geyser of snow and dirt. When the smoke cleared, nothing moved. Voronov reloaded. "They'll send more," he said quietly. "They always send more." By night, the field froze again. The silence returned, broken only by the creak of metal contracting in the cold. Inside the tank, it was colder still. Frost crawled up the walls. The air reeked of oil, smoke, and sweat. They took turns sleeping in shifts, 2 men awake, 2 resting. Rest was not sleep, only the absence of movement. Their food was nearly gone. Orlov melted snow over a small fire made from splintered crates. The flicker of flame painted their faces in shades of orange and blue. He handed Leonov a tin cup filled with steaming water. "For soup," Orlov said. Leonov smiled faintly. "What kind of soup?" "Snow soup." They laughed, hoarse, hollow laughter that faded too soon. On the 4th day, the Germans brought mortars. Shells began to fall in arcs, bursting around the tank, showering it in frozen mud. The ground trembled. Inside, the crew pressed their backs against the armor, waiting for the end that didn't come. When the barrage ceased, Petrov opened the hatch, peered through the smoke, and saw figures approaching. Flamethrower teams. The sight made his blood run cold. "Flamers," he hissed. Voronov's reply was immediate. "Fire at will." The first shell hit the ground before them, blowing a crater that swallowed the attackers whole. The second detonated their fuel tanks. Fire bloomed against the snow, orange against white, a surreal, hellish glow. For a moment, it seemed even the wind stopped to watch. They fought like that, day after day, holding back waves of men with dwindling ammunition. Each night, they counted their shells, rationed bullets, whispered prayers. Petrov's notebook began to fill with trembling lines written in the dark. "The snow is our friend. It hides us, feeds us, buries them. We are not men anymore. We are the tank." On the 8th day, ammunition ran dangerously low. They ventured out under cover of fog, scavenging from the carcasses of burned-out vehicles. Every step was a gamble. Orlov slipped on frozen blood, nearly dropping a shell. Leonov dragged 2 German ammo crates back with his bare hands, frostbitten fingers stiff as wood. When they returned, Petrov smiled faintly. "Enough for another day," he said. But another day was all any of them could promise. The 10th night brought a blizzard so fierce it erased the world. Snow piled over the hull, burying them completely. Inside, they could hear the wind screaming through the gun barrel, a sound like the wail of ghosts. It should have been suffocating. Instead, it was salvation. The storm hid them from German eyes, gave them one more day to live. At dawn, when the sky cleared, the steppe was quiet again. Smoke curled from the tank's barrel like breath from a giant's lungs. Voronov looked out through the slit and whispered, "They think we're dead again." He was right, for now, but the Germans were not finished. That night, as the moon rose over the frozen wasteland, a new sound broke the stillness, a deep, rolling thunder that rattled the ground. Engines, treads, a panzer column was moving toward them. The siege was about to reach its breaking point. The 12th night was colder than death itself. The sky hung low, bruised with clouds. The moonlight made the snow glow blue, beautiful, deceptive, and cruel. Inside the buried T-34, the men waited in silence. Their breath hung in the air like smoke from dying candles. The storm had passed, but its stillness brought something worse, an unease so heavy it felt alive. Then they heard it, a low, rolling rumble, faint at first, then rising, pulsing through the frozen ground. Metal grinding, engines snarling, the unmistakable rhythm of treads crushing snow and bone alike. Petrov looked up from his position by the gun sight. "That's not infantry." Voronov didn't answer. He didn't need to. They all knew the sound. A Panzer IV, perhaps 2, maybe 3. The Germans had decided to finish the job. He checked the gun. 3 shells left, all armor-piercing. Enough for 1 tank, maybe 2 if they were lucky. The aiming gear had jammed days earlier. The turret could barely rotate. To fire, they'd have to move the entire gun manually, by brute force. Voronov looked around at his men, frostbitten, hollow-eyed, exhausted, but still there, still soldiers. He spoke softly. "We've lasted longer than anyone thought possible. Let's make it one more night." The ground trembled. Snow fell from the roof of their steel cave. Through the periscope, Petrov saw the Panzer's silhouette, black against the glowing horizon, moving slow and deliberate, its gun sweeping the field. Infantry followed in its shadow, confident, methodical. They had learned from their failures. They were hunting. Voronov gave the order. "Hold fire!" The Panzer stopped at 200 meters. Its gun turned toward the mound of snow that hid the fortress. Leonov, crouched near the manual traverse crank, whispered, "Now." "Closer," said Voronov. 150 meters. At 80 meters, the Panzer's gun flashed. The shell screamed through the air and slammed into the snowbank. The world exploded. The blast buried them in white fire and ice. The interior lights flickered, then went dark. Orlov screamed, clutching his ear, blood streaming between his fingers. Voronov barked, "Return fire!" Leonov and Petrov heaved against the gun, the barrel grinding as they dragged it into alignment. Muscles tore, sweat froze. "Ready!" Voronov gritted his teeth and fired. The cannon thundered. The recoil slammed through their bodies. Outside, a flash lit up the night, but the shell bounced off the Panzer's angled armor. A miss. The enemy responded instantly. Another shell hit the lower glacis, shattering welds, blowing shards of steel across the cabin. Petrov was thrown backward, dazed, blood trickling from his nose. Smoke filled the tank. Fire licked along the floor. Orlov scrambled to the ammunition rack, coughing through the haze. "Another shell!" he shouted. His hands shook as he loaded it. Voronov steadied the sight. His voice was a whisper. "For the motherland!" he fired. The shell struck the Panzer's turret ring. The explosion was smaller this time, but the result was perfect. The turret jammed. Sparks and smoke burst from the German tank. A second later, flames erupted from its hatches. The Panzer was burning. Inside the T-34, the men cheered, hoarse, disbelieving. The sound was raw, human, alive. But the victory cost them everything. The recoil had cracked their own barrel housing. The next shot, they knew, would likely destroy them. Outside, German infantry pressed closer, enraged by the sight of their burning tank. Machine gun fire raked the snow, hammering against the armor. The fortress shuddered, groaning under the strain. Petrov slumped beside the gun, pale, coughing blood. "Tell them," he murmured, "we did our duty." Voronov placed a gloved hand on his shoulder. "You just did." When the next shell hit, it tore open the side hatch. The firestorm that followed consumed the inside in choking black smoke. And yet, even then, the T-34 did not fall silent. Its machine gun still spat defiance into the dark, cutting down the last wave of German soldiers before the flames forced the survivors to retreat. Hours later, the field was quiet again. The Panzer burned itself to ash. Snow fell softly, covering the dead, cooling the twisted metal. Inside the T-34 fortress, 3 men remained alive. Barely. Petrov's body lay slumped against the gun, hands still gripping the trigger. Voronov sat beside him, eyes closed, whispering a single word into the smoke. Hold. They had done more than hold. They had made history. 2 days after the fire, the steppe fell silent. The blizzard had rolled in again, thick and merciful, erasing every footprint and every scar. Beneath that white veil, the T-34 fortress sat entombed, black smoke still curling from its barrel. The Germans had moved on, convinced that whatever had haunted that field was finally gone. But inside the tank, 3 men still clung to life. Lieutenant Alexei Voronov drifted in and out of consciousness, his lungs raw from smoke, his coat stiff with frozen blood. Yuri Orlov coughed weakly, his face grey, his hands blistered. Ivan Leonov, the driver, kept the tiny fire going inside a rusted shell casing, feeding it shreds of maps and paper from Petrov's notebook. The flames were no bigger than a candle, but they meant life. They had no food left, no ammunition worth counting. The radio had burned out days earlier. All they had was the cold, and each other. Voronov stared at Petrov's body for a long time, the gunner's hands still locked around the machine gun grip, his face serene, almost peaceful. He reached over, closed the man's eyes, and whispered, "You kept your post, Mikhail. You did not fall back." Outside, the wind howled. Then, faintly, through the muffled roar of the storm came a new sound. Not German engines, not artillery, something else. The deep, rhythmic thunder of Katyusha rockets screamed in the distance. Soviet artillery. The Red Army was returning. Voronov's eyes snapped open. "They're ours," he rasped. "They've broken through." He tried to rise, but collapsed against the steel wall. Leonov grabbed his arm. "You're hurt. Get the flare," Voronov ordered. Orlov shook his head. "We used the last one." Leonov's gaze drifted to the gun barrel, still jutting through the snow. "Then we'll make our own." He climbed out through the hatch into the storm. The cold struck him like a hammer, stealing his breath. Snow lashed against his face. He stumbled onto the turret, pulled a rag from his pocket, dipped it in oil, and tied it to the broken machine gun barrel. One spark from a match, and the rag flared orange against the blinding white. A signal of life. Minutes crawled by. Then, through the fog, came movement. Dark figures advancing low and fast. Soviet infantry, rifles ready, their coats powdered with frost. They had been sweeping the field, following coordinates from a reconnaissance plane that had spotted the tank's smoke days earlier. When they reached the burned-out Panzer, they paused. One soldier pointed toward the half-buried T-34, its barrel still glowing faintly. The commander, a major of the 62nd Army, approached cautiously. "Check it." A young sergeant climbed onto the hull, banged on the hatch. "Is anyone alive in there?" Inside, Voronov stirred. He heard the words through the steel. Russian, not German. He forced the hatch open with trembling hands. Cold air and daylight flooded in. The rescuers pulled them out one by one. Voronov, Leonov, Orlov. All 3 barely standing, eyes red from smoke, faces hollow from starvation. The major looked at them, astonished. "How long have you been here?" Voronov's reply was hoarse, almost a whisper. "Since the 5th. We held." Behind him, the soldiers peered into the tank. Inside was a scene out of myth. Walls blackened, shell casings stacked like bricks, blood frozen in crimson streaks. Petrov's body sat upright at his gun, still guarding the field. No one spoke for a long time. Then the major said quietly, "It was not a tank. It was a fortress." They helped the survivors to their lines. As they walked away, the wind carried the creak of the tank settling into the snow, like a sigh of rest. Later, engineers would recover the vehicle. They counted more than 40 impact marks, evidence of mortars, rifles, and tank shells, all endured by that one machine and its crew. The official report called it a static defense point. But to those who saw it, it was something greater, a monument to endurance, carved not in marble, but in steel and blood. And somewhere in the storm, the last echo of Petrov's gun still lingered, a single endless note of defiance against the cold. When spring finally came to the steppe in 1943, the snow melted and revealed the scars of war. The fields outside Stalingrad were littered with twisted iron, broken rifles, and the bones of two armies. But among the ruins, one shape stood apart, a rusted T-34, its barrel frozen in place, its hull half collapsed, but unmistakably proud. Soldiers passing by would stop, remove their caps, and stand in silence before it. They had heard the story. Everyone had. They called it the Fortress on Tracks. Engineers from the 62nd Army arrived weeks later to recover the vehicle. It took 3 trucks and a team of welders to pull it free from the ice. When they opened the hatch, the smell of smoke and oil still clung to the air. Inside, they found what the rescuers had described: a command post, a bunker, and a grave all at once. On the interior walls, scratched with a knife into the steel, were 4 names: Voronov, Petrov, Leonov, Orlov, and beneath them, one sentence: "We held." That inscription was preserved, copied, and passed from hand to hand across the front. By the time the Soviet counter-offensive surged westward, the legend of Voronov's crew had become a rallying cry. Tankers painted the words "We held" on their turrets. Infantrymen whispered the tale around campfires, the story of the crew who turned death itself into a weapon. Voronov and his surviving men spent weeks recovering in a field hospital near Beketovka. Leonov lost 3 fingers to frostbite. Orlov's lungs never fully healed, but both insisted on returning to the front. As soon as he could stand, Lieutenant Voronov requested reassignment to an active tank battalion. His commanding officer hesitated. "You've done enough, comrade," he said. Voronov's reply was simple: "Not until they stop coming." He was given command of a new T-34 in the spring of 1944. It bore the same words on its side: Mat Zheleznaya, Iron Mother. He led his unit through Belarus, across Poland, and into Germany itself. By the war's end, he had earned the title Hero of the Soviet Union. But when asked about it years later, he only shook his head. "The hero was the tank," he said. "We were only her hands." After the war, the burned-out hull of his original T-34 was placed on a stone pedestal outside Stalingrad, now Volgograd. Children came every Victory Day to lay flowers at its base. Veterans would touch the cold metal, whispering prayers, remembering the winter that had nearly broken them. It became a symbol, not of victory, but of endurance. Soviet tank crews learned from its example. Training manuals referenced Voronov's stand as proof that even a disabled vehicle could serve as a fixed defense. Engineers studied the crew's improvised modifications, the mounted machine guns, the snow embankments, the field repairs done with scavenged parts. Out of desperation, innovation had been born. But beyond tactics and design, the true legacy was something intangible. It was the idea that willpower could outlast machinery, that even when stripped of movement, of resources, of hope, men could still choose to fight. Voronov lived until 1971. He rarely spoke of those 11 days, but when he did, his voice would change, soft, distant, reverent. In an interview not long before his death, he said, "A tank without an engine is a coffin. Unless you refuse to die inside it, then it becomes a fortress, and if you hold long enough, others will come." Today, the remains of that tank still stand in Volgograd, surrounded by quiet grass and the whisper of the Volga wind. Its armor bears the scars of 42 impacts. Its turret points west, toward the horizon where the German 6th Army once came. The plaque beneath it reads, "Here, 4 men turned a broken machine into a wall, and by their will, the line did not fall. The narrator's voice lowers to a reflective hush. In every war, there are moments when men and machines merge, when courage fuses with iron and becomes something greater than both. This was one of those moments. A broken tank became a fortress. 4 ordinary soldiers became immortal, and the snows of Stalingrad remembered them.